Oh, Eden, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well, and you?
Yeah, not bad, not bad. Sweltering, sweltering. The usual jacket has been got rid of, and the t-shirt is only on as a legal requirement because otherwise, yeah, I don't think YouTube or TikTok would allow any of this to be published.
Community standard.
But yeah, basic human decency. It's something I've been working on for a while, with mixed results. So, I guess we really should start off and ask you, like, what inspired you to become a horror author?
I don't think there was any one thing, but I can say that I grew up in a horror-loving family. We would all get together and on Saturday and Sundays watch horror films together as a
Ah,
family.
nice.
Um, Saturday nights were usually sort of whatever the newer films were, but aging myself here, those were 70s and 80s movies. And Sundays were those black and white Hammer horror films that would come on TV. And we would just all sit as a family and watch them. And I never remember not being exposed to horror. So, I sort of think it was a natural progression because I always loved reading. So putting those two things together, I think it was just an inevitability, really.
Yeah, can you remember your first horror movie or book?
Ooh, um, horror is a super subjective book because if you think about it, you could consider Peter Rabbit a horror story. Trying to escape with your life, essentially. Um, but probably something that was marketed as horror. Probably some Goosebump stories, or I remember reading Bunnicula as a child. I remember reading Edward Gorey's The Ghastly Crumb Tinies and absolutely loving that book. I saw it at the library and I flipped through it and I thought it was great. And I took it to my mom because she always had to sort of approve books that I was able to check out from the library. And I was so worried that she was going to say no. And she flipped through the book and she kind of chuckled and gave it back to me and said that it was fine. And I knew from there on out I was probably going to be okay.
Yeah, my mother was a librarian, so I had free access to the school library system. So any book I wanted, I could get, which was
Excellent.
absolutely phenomenal as a child. I remember when I was in primary school, my teacher wrote a stern letter home saying that I was stealing the books on pirates and not reading about Jennifer Yellowhat, which was what was required. And my mother replied saying, if he's reading more advanced books, go him.
I think that's the perfect answer.
Absolutely. I've always said if someone is reading, don't interrupt it. It doesn't matter what it is. If they're reading, good.
I agree. My mom taught school for most of her career, and that was pretty much her take on it. And I read so many things, just absolutely anything. Her old books, stuff from the library, exchange with friends. So as long as you're reading,
Yeah.
even though I probably read some stuff outside of my age group at a very very young age, but I turned out fine.
At the age of 8, I was I had my first time in a caravan with my sister's friend. I watched Hellraiser, and yeah, 8-year-olds, 8-year-olds, or was I 10? Somewhere between that. But yeah, that was my first experience. And ever since then, I've loved leather and, well, been quite gay. So maybe it influenced me a little bit. And then The Fly with Jeff Goldblum. That was the
That's
next
an
one I
excellent.
saw.
That's excellent. I watched The Exorcist with my mother.
Oh
Um,
no.
I did. I just she always felt like watching it together. If I had questions or concerns, or if I was nervous or scared, she was there. So we watched that together. We watched A Nightmare on Elm Street together. Um, my mother really liked Wes Craven movies,
Oh, nice.
so Serpent in the Rainbow and all that sort of stuff. Um, so yeah, we were able to bond over scary movies.
Now, my mum wouldn't watch any scary movies, but we would definitely bond over books. And if she saw I was reading books that she wasn't aware of, then she would read them as well. And she was an even more is an even more voracious reader than I am. So she tore through them. But yeah, and and you've been writing horror for years now. You're a veteran. And also, congratulations on your recent award win and nomination. Were you going for a
Thank you
clean
so
sweep?
much. I honestly, I was so surprised by the nominations because, like you said, I've been writing horror for a long time, and this year is my first nomination ever for the Stoker Award. Um, someone else um, was also nominated, and I congratulated her. And she came back and she said, "Oh well, congratulations to you too, but surely this isn't your first time being nominated." I said, "Actually, it is." And she couldn't believe it. I said, "No, seriously." It just so happens that I was nominated in two categories for two books. Um, and people say to me sometimes, "Well, the fact that you have two books out in 1 year is amazing." And I said, "Sometimes it's not always my intention to have two books come out in 1 year, but that's sort of how traditional publishing sometimes works. You don't always have control over when the book comes out. And it just so happens that two of them came out in 1 year and were well received. So I was shocked, but absolutely thrilled.
Fantastic and well deserved. And
Thank you so much.
so, how did you get into traditional publishing? What was your route?
I started out as a short story writer because not only did I love just reading short stories, um, I always wondered how people could write novels because I thought, I'm almost maxed out at a 5,000 word short story. How do people write upwards of 75,000 words on one particular project? And at the time, it was just, I felt like it was beyond me. So I would write short stories and I would submit them to magazines. And I got so many rejections. And the rejections would be, I like this thing, but ultimately it didn't come together, or something of that nature. Someone once rejected my story saying that they liked the milieu. And I thought, I've got a rejection with the word milieu in it, but they didn't get the magic, quote unquote. And I thought, it's magic. What is there to try and understand?
Yeah,
So once I accumulated enough rejections for stories that I thought were pretty good, and friends of mine who'd read thought were pretty good, I just thought, I'm going to take it upon myself to put together a collection, which was Spooklights, Southern Gothic Horror. That was my first collection of short stories that I chose the order of, chose the stories, worked on formatting and the cover and all that jazz because I just really believed in the stories. And I put out a second collection, Spooklights 2, but as Spooklights got a little bit of attention, probably from my jumping up and down on social media, asking people to read it at the time. Um, it started to get some decent reviews and some people started reading it. And I eventually got my first acceptance from a pro paying short story magazine. And eventually I started going, okay, I should write something longer. And I ended up writing what would become Root Magic, but I wrote that as a collection of short stories first. because
Right.
again, the novel format was, I still thought it was out of my reach. So I wrote it as short stories. And so I then went, now I'm going to go back and write to connect these short stories. So I thought, great, now I can go and try and get this traditionally published. And I went through that process of trying to find an agent, and I did the sort of online querying, at the time they had these sort of Twitter campaigns for querying. And I got requests, but nobody wanted the manuscript. And so I thought, okay, well, I wonder what's wrong. And I joined um, I guess you would call it um, a summer program of being an intern and apprenticing to a more seasoned author. I went through this writing in the margins program, and I got paired up with a wonderful writer. Her name's Sandra Mitchell. Um, and she said, I'm going to read what you've got and come back to you. And she'd published middle grade, she published YA, she had edited several LGBTQ anthologies in dark fantasy and horror. And she came back to me and she said, okay, my first question to you is I need for you to decide, do you want this to be a book for kids, or do you want this to be a book for adults with child protagonists, sort of like To Kill a Mockingbird? And I thought about it and I looked at a lot of the themes in that novel, and it was introducing my culture, which is Belgici culture, and a lot of root work and hoodoo, real magic. And I thought, maybe I need to write this for kids because I want kids to understand from a very young age that there are people that are different from them, but they can still sympathize with, empathize with, root for. And so I thought, that's what I'm going to do. And I went back to her and I said, I want it to be for kids. And she said, okay, great. Here are my suggestions. So I followed her suggestions and I queried directly the next time. And I had one agent come back to me and say, I want to represent you, but one is all it takes. So that's my long winded explanation. It's probably way more than you wanted to hear.
No, no, that's absolutely fantastic. That's laying out a roadmap. That's that's exactly what people want to know. And you mentioned hoodoo. For someone who is an absolute layman, what's the difference between hoodoo and voodoo? Is that a really long question?
Um, I think that it can be answered briefly, but knowing that there is a larger, wider explanation that would mean someone would have to sort of take on the mantle of doing some research. So, voodoo is an incorrect pronunciation of voodoo, which is a religion based in, I think, originating in Haiti, Dominica, that area. And a lot of the saints that are um, usually in the Catholic Church are also in voodoo, but they are not called saints, they're called Loa. And hoodoo is different in that it is a uniquely African American creation because while it has roots in um, Western and West Central African traditions, it is basically what people brought to the Americas through the transatlantic slave trade had to basically sort of cobble together from being in a new area, still wanting to practice what they knew of not only their religion, but also um, healthcare, which they usually weren't given as enslaved people, and keeping together their folklore and stories and traditions. So it's a combination of things, but if you ask different people what hoodoo is, you'll get different answers because some people practice hoodoo as a religion. Some people investigate hoodoo because they want to know about their ancestry and their origins. Some people investigate it because they want to get back to herbal remedies and living off the land and learning how to do that more effectively and confidently. Some people do it for a spiritual aspect. So while it's a combination of things, different it means different things to different people.
It's similar to music in that respect.
Very much so.
Yeah, I still remember Lemmy from Motorhead always claimed that he didn't write heavy metal, he wrote blues. It's just that he took a lot of speed, so he played it very fast. And the rest of us are like, well, I'm pretty sure it's heavy metal, but okay, you know, it's yep. So you discussed how you did your transition from short stories to novels by interlacing a network of short stories together. I think that's how George R. R. Martin did Game of Thrones as well, because he was predominantly a short story writer beforehand. So each chapter was a short story from someone else's perspective. What's your writing routine?
I appreciate that you think I might have a routine. That's, that's very kind of you, because I feel like my writing process is quite chaotic, um, and unpredictable in a lot of ways. Um, I think it's important to say that projects are different. And if I have to write a short story, there are times where I go, okay, I've got the idea. I'm going to sit here and write a short story from start to finish. But there are other times where I think I have a ghost of an idea, maybe, sort of, I'm not sure. And I write down a couple of sentences and then I try to start going through things that I've written before and saved that I hadn't finished. My novella Hollow Tongue, the one that was nominated for the Stoker in the long fiction category, that was born from a sweet romantic story that I wrote that I tried to sell that nobody wanted to buy from me. And I thought, does nobody want a sweet romantic story from me? What gives? So I went, fine. And I turned it into this horror novella, excuse me. And I just sort of took the basis of that story and pulled it apart and wove back in the horror elements. So every project is different, but I try to embrace the fact that that's the case. Um, but I do tend to work better when I have a deadline looming.
We all do. We need the
Oh,
axe, the sword of
yes,
Damocles over us.
absolutely, absolutely. I'm also a fragrance lover, so I have a dresser set up with different fragrances. And sometimes, if I'm writing something of a certain genre or persuasion or a certain scene or a certain character, I'll choose a different fragrance to wear that morning, going, okay, this is the nothing bad's happened yet scene. So that'll be something that a certain fragrance that I choose. Or I go, I have to write something that is quite unsettling today. So the scene coming up is going to be one of those really dark ones. So I'll choose something different.
So
So that is part of my process as well.
you're a method sniffer.
Absolutely.
And
A
what
fragrant method. I have a
I'm
fragrant
terrified
method
to
of
ask.
writing. So.
Yeah, I'm terrified to ask this, but what would be an unsettling scent to, for the scene?
Well, the scent itself wouldn't be unsettling, but the scent would have to be, maybe it's a heavier scent, maybe there's a bit of smoke in it, or maybe some leather or tobacco essences. There are fragrances that are out there that I haven't tried that are purposefully blended to be strange. So if anyone's looking to try this method, there are certain things that you can go and grab yourself a sample of something that's marketed as being strange. Um, I think, I can't remember the name of the fragrance now, but I remember the fragrance house took someone's review of it that was not a kind review at all and put it in their marketing. Um, and I can't remember verbatim what it said, but it was something about, I think, was it something like a sweaty man eating an orange? I can't remember. It was something along those lines. So that if that idea appealed to someone, then they could certainly go and grab that particular fragrance.
I've definitely seen authors on Instagram posting up reader reviews that have been like 1-star reader reviews that actually sell the book.
Oh, absolutely. There are some people that um, they really gravitate toward that.
Yeah, I sorry, puppy interrupting. Stop that.
That's fine.
And so it sounds like, is it fair to say that you're more of a discovery writer, or do you do like outlining? What's your writing process?
For short stories, I really rarely outline. I start with an idea or I start with a character, and sometimes it's I have a character who, and maybe it's they've gone through a certain trauma, or maybe it's someone who has um, moved or changed locations for something, or maybe it's someone that's in a desperate spot for this particular reason. And maybe that's the starting point, and I'll start writing that. And I'm more able and willing to do that discovery with something shorter. But with novels, I've found that I do need to have some kind of plan. Whether it's a full outline, Roman numeral kind of thing, or whether it's I'm going to write a synopsis as if I'm trying to sort of pitch it to someone. So I'll have all of the major points in the synopsis, but it reads more like a short piece in and of itself as opposed to bullet points. So depending on what the story is, the Creeping of Dogwood House, I wrote a full synopsis for that, and I went from the synopsis while I was writing. So I would write to a certain point and go, okay, what did I say was going to happen next? Okay, I need to get to this next point. So I would write something that would get me to the next section of the synopsis.
Do you ever, like when you're doing that, look at your synopsis and go, no, 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 my characters would not do that. What was I thinking? And then just start rewriting the synopsis, or do you follow it as a recipe?
Um, I don't alter the synopsis, but when I'm writing the actual book, I will veer away from it if I think that it doesn't work. Um, and I've done 3 novels and 2 novellas now. So more often than not, it does sometimes go in a different place than I expected it to. And depending on the book or the story, sometimes it will veer far off, sometimes it won't veer very much, or sometimes I go, I need to get it to this particular point because this particular point is something that I want to keep. And this is something that's important. So I do need to write to this next section.
Right. Yeah, I can see that. And how do you fuel your writing process? Other than, do you go to extreme methods like ice baths, or is it tea or coffee? What is it that keeps you going?
I like both tea and coffee, hot or iced, depending on how I'm feeling. Um, I think that most of my writing fuel is probably I do like flavored waters.
Okay.
Depending on what I find, sometimes still, sometimes sparkling.
Yeah, I love
So
sparkling
hydration
water.
is important.
Yeah, yeah. Got through 2 bottles of sparkling water already today. It's the temperature I blame it on. But yeah, otherwise it's black coffee for me, which I'm not allowed, but I do all my best writing on black coffee. I really do. But, chug down like a mug of that and then just hammer away like a mentalist until it fades. And then I just sort of collapse in a sweaty mess, possibly holding an orange. So the fragrance is out there. And so you've done self-publishing and traditional publishing. How do you find things are different between them? Do you have a preference?
I don't know that I have a preference, but I will say that if you're a person who's looking for immediacy, then traditional publishing is not for you. Um, Self-publishing gives you so much more control over the process. Um, but when you self-publish, if you're not able to pay people to do every step for you, you then have to learn how to do everything yourself. You have to format, you have to put together a cover. There are certain things that will do a cover for you, but more often than not, you probably have in your mind what you want your cover to look like. Um, you'll have to be the one to choose the order of the stories if it's a short story collection. You're going to have to be the one to decide, do I want to do an epigraph or a foreword or any of that sort of stuff? If you want to use something that um, has some sort of copyright to it, do you want to reach out yourself and ask, hey, can I use this quote or this song lyric? So all of that you're going to have to do yourself, as opposed to traditional publishing where you write it and you try and get someone interested in picking it up and representing it, but there isn't a lot of control over when does it come out, even though you'll have someone else go, sure, we'll do the copy editing for you, we'll of course do the formatting, we'll do some sort of cool little graphic that's at the beginning of each chapter. um, like the creeping of Dogwood House, that has um, hair as a theme uh, in one of the horror elements in the book. And and at the beginning of each chapter, there's this sort of creepy looking tendrils of hair that sort of come out from each number. And I didn't do any of that. I didn't know that was happening until I actually saw the galley. So it really depends on how hands on you want to be, how much you want to sort of teach yourself about the process. Traditional publishing also gives you the benefit of having a wider network because they're going to have places that they're going to suggest your book, whether it's uh, bloggers or bookstagrammers or uh, libraries or bookstores that they've worked with before. And sometimes bookstores will want the confidence of going, hey, if we buy a bunch of these books and they don't sell, we can return them.
Yeah.
So there are pros and cons to it, but I would say, depending on which one works for you in a specific project, go with that. Because I always tell people you don't have to choose. You can be a hybrid author. And there are lots of authors that do both self publishing and traditional publishing. And sort of in the middle, there are some small presses that give you a little bit of both. You know, you get a little bit more hands on attention and maybe a little bit more input into the process of something. Um, so somewhere in between self pub and say big five traditional publishing.
And have you ever, with the copy editing, have you ever read through it? Do they give you a final copy and say, "Are you okay with the copy editing in here?" Because grammar can be subjective.
Grammar can be very subjective, especially if you tend to have dialect in your books, like I do. My first novel, Root Magic, has both the Gullah language and the Geechee dialect in it. And I did have to fight for that to be included because my editor at the time went, well, we don't do dialect, especially not for, middle grade age books. And I said, well, the book doesn't work without it. And thankfully, he went off and did some research on his own and came back to me and said, I'm really sorry. I want this book to be what you want it to be, so I will do the editing for, let's say, characterization, pacing, that sort of thing, but I'll leave the language up to you. So when I got the document that was um, copy edited, where we passed developmental edits, and I got copy edits, you get this Word document, or I got this Word document, and it was track changes. And a lot of it was mostly, do you mean this or do you mean this? And I want to encourage people that are in that position. If you want to explain your choice, you certainly can. But if you don't want to explain it and you just want it to be exactly the way you wrote it, just set it and move on. You don't have to worry about, do I need to explain exactly why I made this choice? Or is the copy editor going to feel, put upon by my studying this whole novel? They won't. They're asking the question and they're just sort of going, I'm probably trying to be your average reader. So this is just kind of not only giving you a heads up on, did you mean this or intend this, but also helping you recognize this is someone that's reading your book that doesn't know you, who isn't sort of in your head and possibly hasn't read your work before. And this might be who the average reader, where they're starting from also. So just to give you that, additional sort of check to go, do I want to make a change or am I happy with what I've got?
Yeah, I think that's where beta readers are so useful, and having beta readers from a mix of backgrounds as well. One of my earliest stories that I released, it was just a freebie that I put out on my website, but I wrote it not taking into account Americans and the way words work in different countries. And I had the main character, they pulled a Yorkie out of their pocket. And I was thinking chocolate bar, but my American readers were like, they had a dog in their pocket? So, yeah, it's very useful to have diverse beta readers or viewpoints when you're handing over your edited. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, I sorry, I'm asking for so many definitions in this interview, but um, a lot of your books, I've got spotlights in front of me here, and it's Southern Gothic. Now, I know as a layman, I'm thinking the originals, I'm thinking the new series of Interview with a Vampire. But what does Southern Gothic mean to you?
There are people who have this, really long, drawn out explanation of what Southern Gothic is and the tenets of Southern Gothic and all of that. But for me, Southern Gothic simply means you're writing about the lives of people in the American South. And whether that includes people who are well to do, people who are not so well to do, including religion or spiritualism or magic or ghosts, all of that is really part of the lifestyle. So my simple definition is you're writing about the lives of people in the American South, and that's it.
That is a much easier definition than I was expecting. That is brilliant. Thank you. I always um, worry that again it's going to be like music, and there'll be a very complicated definition. Um, but then I guess it's like these things where it depends who you ask as well.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure there are people with much more complex definitions than that, but that's what I'm going with.
Excellent. Well, I mean, as a Stoker Award winner and nominee, I think we can ground you as an expert in this area.
I appreciate that greatly. Thank you.
And so you mentioned that you submitted to loads of magazines and anthologies in the past. What was your submission process like?
Early on,
Oh, well, let's start with and
early on, or um,
then move on.
early on, I would read these magazines online, and I would be so thrilled with certain stories, and I would just go, "I love this magazine," or "I love the artwork that they have," or whatever it was, and I would decide that I wanted to have stories in this particular magazine, and I had a dream list, so to speak. And I would write something, I would have a beta reader, I would read it over myself, and finally read through the call for submissions. And then I would submit, and most of the time early on, I would get rejections. And at the time, early on, I was in a writer's group where the guy who ran it would have people celebrate their rejections. So when we would have these meetings, he would ask if there were any submissions, acceptances, rejections, and we would celebrate the rejections because that meant that you actually finished a project and sent it out there in the world, which
That's
is,
a brilliant idea.
yeah, a lot of people don't get to that point. And the fact that you said, I am confident enough in this project, I have finished it by the deadline, I have sent it in, I put myself out there. So we used to celebrate rejections, and that took some of the bite out of getting them early on, which I think was very important for me as a writer. A lot of times people have difficulty with receiving rejections, and it isn't fun, but you're able to sort of put it in perspective because it's not always a reflection on your work. There's a number of reasons your work could be rejected. Maybe they have recently published a story with similar themes, and they just go, our readers are probably going to go, hey, that's like something you published last month. And even though your story is good, they want something that is a little bit different from issue to issue. So if you had probably submitted that story a lot earlier or a lot later, maybe it would have gotten picked up. So knowing that a lot of it is sometimes not under your control and not based on your writing
And
is
also, I think
also.
rejections, they make you into what you are because they're all steps that are leading up to it. And writing is a growth. It's a skill, and you got to flex those muscles, and you got to make mistakes. I think it's a wonderful idea about celebrating rejections. I shall suggest that to my writing group. That's always something I would say to new writers. It's join a writing group because I've learned so much from my writing group. I really have. And we've all sort of fostered each other as we've moved up the chain and published book after book, and we've been there and formed friendships throughout.
Excellent. I do recommend making that suggestion because I do think that the fear of rejection does prevent a lot of people from moving forward with their
Yeah.
work.
imposter syndrome is a powerful thing with authors.
Absolutely.
So now you're a wise veteran, award-winning wise veteran of the writing community. If you were to talk to your younger self as you're just about to submit your first short story, if you're able to communicate, what would you say to yourself?
Ooh, that's a good question. Couple things probably. I would say stop worrying. Um, Worry is something that it not only can prevent you from sending your work in, but once you send your work in, it's just something that takes up time and space in your brain when you can't actually do anything about it. I suppose the only thing you could do about it after you submit a story would be to withdraw it, but I don't recommend doing that. I would probably also say once you hit the submit button, walk away from the computer.
Yeah,
Do something else, even if it's doing something else for the rest of the day.
I think one of the things that I'm aware that I shouldn't do, um, and that I still do it, is I am notorious at pressing F5 on the KDP dashboard. Um, it's not going to change massively throughout the day, and some days are better than others. But I can't help it as I walk by, and I was a computer programmer for 20 years, so my house is full of computers, and there are monitors everywhere, and it looks like something from 1984. But so I have my KDB dashboard, and I walk by and I'm like, five. And if any of my mates were listening to this or watching this, depending on what format they're seeing it in, they'd be saying, set up a script that will automatically refresh it. And I think that'll make it worse, actually. I think that will exacerbate the problem.
It can be so difficult. Um I don't check anymore. I just stopped because it is very easy to just kind of get stuck into that loop of refreshing.
And when you self-published, you mentioned that you did a huge thing on TikTok. Do you have any marketing tips, marketing tips for new authors?
It wasn't TikTok. When I self-published my first short story collection, that was in 2015. And I think that was pre-TikTok. But what I did do, I was on Facebook at the time, and I belonged to several horror groups. I also used to um, write for a now defunct online magazine called Graveyard Shift Sisters. So I would ask people who were in the horror community, would you be willing to read this short story collection and leave a review if you're willing? And I just had a email template, and I would go, okay, this is someone that I've seen their reviews, or we've chatted about films or books or games or something along those lines. And I would mention, hey, I've got this book. Would you be interested in reading it? I'll be happy to send you a copy. And it was just very much trying to connect with people and connect with people who were interested in horror, but also who understood that horror wasn't just someone chasing you through a campground, that horror could be different things and have different imagery, um, have different intentions, really. Um, so it was very much trying to make those interpersonal connections and offering to also read for those people also. So I'm happy to exchange reads. I'm happy to share your project on my social media, um, any of those things, because it was important for me to give back as well as ask people to give time to my work as well.
And that's also how we grow. With reading is fuel. I don't think you can be a writer if you also don't read. You and in whatever format you're doing. I am not very good with audiobooks, but because I've done a lot of live reading of my books, I've sort of gone out my way to listen to audiobooks as well, so I could learn from that medium. Because again, I have definitely found when reading out my stories, some of them need a little bit of alteration if they're to be an audiobook, especially with things like dialogue tags, because I'm not great at voices, and especially if I have to do accents as well, it's just sounds terrible. It sounds like a drunken caricature, and that's not what you want. So I try and avoid any kind of accents, even if the character has an accent. An inflection I can do, and that's about my limit. But yeah. So um, sorry, going back to the Southern Gothic that we've mentioned, the hoodoo and the voodoo. What, in your personal view, what would you say are the responsibilities of a horror writer when they're representing real cultural practices?
I would say it's not just if you're a horror writer, but if you're any kind of writer, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. Um, One of the responsibilities you have, um, and I think this is something that I hope people start to get away from. Um, People have a tendency of believing that if it's written in a book, then that has more importance and validity than you actually talking with someone who experienced the event or who practices the religion or the rituals or whatever have you. For whatever reason, there's this prevailing idea that if it's written down in a book, that is of more importance. Um, and I would love for people to move away from that. And if you know someone um, who has maybe experienced the event that you want to write about, or maybe someone who practices that particular magic or religion that you want to write about, I would love for people to go more to the source as opposed to just books, because so often when you write books, you're on the outside of the thing looking in. A lot of people are writing from maybe a scholarly point of view about certain topics, and they're writing about it almost in a scientific way, in a disinterested way. And that can come across in fiction and in nonfiction as feeling, I won't say disjointed, but feeling inauthentic and feeling distant. And it's going to probably have inaccuracies that detract from the story if the person happens to know about the topic that you're writing. If you're familiar with the topic, then I think that it's easier to make adjustments or make changes to help preserve the culture that you're writing about. But one of the things that's difficult that I really wish people would do in a preserving a cultural point of view is giving credit when you have used something for research. If you've used a book or if you've spoken to someone or whatever have you, um, give them credit for the conversation or note that you read these books to get this information. Um, I look at some of the way that scholarly texts are written, and a lot of times those things are written not having interacted with the community that's being written about. So you're making observations from a distance, but because you don't have knowledge of the subject, you're making assumptions about the people's intentions or what they're doing. One of the things that um, when I talk about hoodoo, sometimes people say, well, this is a unsettling practice or it's a pagan practice. And people don't understand that hoodoo is something that was born because people from a certain religious background were brought to the Caribbean islands and to the Americas, and they were taught Christianity. So they're trying to sort of find a path through these, in some ways, very different practices. So hoodoo actually has lots of Bible references, has lots of Bible practices. Um, it's something that is a very deep and wide, um, I'm going to use the word practice again because I can't think of another one. Um, because it was born of something that wasn't necessarily solely intentional on the practicer's part. And when enslaved people went to practice what they knew, their original African traditional religion, people were just either appalled or horrified or stopped them, or they would be beaten or whipped or whatever have you. So they would want to conceal the fact that they're trying to do these practices. So people would observe them and go, well, if you're hiding to do it, clearly there must be something wrong with it. Well, people are going to hide to do something if they think that they're going to face censure, whether it's necessarily a bad thing or not. Maybe it isn't a bad thing for a kid to want a piece of candy, but if they know that someone is going to get angry at them for it, yeah, they're going to hide to have a piece of candy.
Yeah.
So I think that being respectful and realizing that a lot of these practices have a very long history is important. And as authors, we don't always have the time or the ability to do the in depth research. And I think that sometimes doing it ethnographically, talking to other people, is a way to not only make connections, but find out the information that you want to know from an authentic point of view without maybe having that sort of disinterested lens put on it.
Yeah. Getting that emotional context as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that wonderful answer to a very complicated question.
You're very welcome.
And yeah, thank you very much for meeting up with me. This has been a wonderful chat. I've had a fantastic time and learned so much.
It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
And I hope to speak to you again when your next book is published.
I will let you know whenever that is. I'm working on one now.
What is coming up in the future for you?
I have a Southern Gothic fantasy coming out in October, which is called Cycle Pomp and Circumstance. And while it is a
Gorgeous name.
fantasy, oh, thank you so much. I love the title. Um, there are some darker elements because it is about a young woman during what's called the Reconstruction era in the American South. It's right after the Civil War. And her estranged aunt passes away, and her family wants nothing to do with planning the funeral. And this young woman decides that even though she was estranged, she deserves a funeral. So she travels to a distant town and stays in her aunt's sort of unsettling home to try and learn about her to give her the proper funeral. And she there, while there, learns that there are some family secrets that linger after death. So that is coming out in October. So I'll be doing some promo for that. And I'll also be trying to finish my first full length horror novel before the year is over.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you very much. Sorry, throwing the last question out there as a curveball. But
No, I'm always happy to talk about pending projects and all that good stuff. So ask away. Absolutely.
thank you very much for meeting with me.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Bye bye.